Welcome to the Explainer. There was a time when European conquest seemed pretty much unstoppable, but one battle completely changed the game. Today, we're going to talk about how an African nation didn't just fight back against a modern European empire, but handed them a defeat that was heard all around the world. Okay, so picture this. It's March 1st, 1896. This is the absolute peak of the so-called scramble for Africa, right? European dominance is just seen as a fact of life. And then something totally unthinkable happens. An African army doesn't just, put up a good fight. No, they deliver an absolutely decisive, crushing, and, let's be honest, humiliating defeat to a modern European power. So how in the world did they do it? How did Ethiopia pull off what everyone thought was impossible and literally change the course of history? Well, it's an incredible story of smart diplomacy, amazing military strategy, and a nation that they just refused to be colonized. All right, so let's start at the beginning. And our story actually begins not in Africa, but in Europe. We've got Italy, which is a pretty new country at this point, just recently unified. And they're feeling a little insecure. They want to be a big player on the world stage, and like everyone else, they figured the way to do that was to build a colonial empire. Their prime minister, a guy named Francesco Crispi, was super ambitious. He saw Africa as the answer to all of Italy's problems back home: unemployment, economic issues, you name it. The plan seemed pretty straightforward. They'd already grabbed a piece of the coast, which they called Eritrea, and now they were going to expand inland and take the real prize, the ancient empire of Ethiopia. Now, here's where things get sneaky. Italy's first big move wasn't a military invasion. Nope. It was all about a piece of paper. They cooked up this treaty that was built on a lie, a deception, that would end up being the very thing that started the war. This was called the Treaty of Wakale, and if you just glanced at it, it seemed pretty normal. It was about friendship, trade, setting up borders, but there was a trap. Buried inside was this one little article, Article 17, and it had two very, very different meanings. And the whole trick, the whole deception, came down to a single word. Seriously. The version in Amharic, the one Emperor Menelik II actually read and signed, said that Ethiopia could, if it wanted to, use Italy's help with foreign relations. But the Italian version, it used a word that meant Ethiopia must. See the difference? That one word change basically turned Ethiopia into a protectorate, a colony. And based on that trick, Italy went around telling all the other European powers, hey, Ethiopia's ours now. But here's the thing. Emperor Menelik was no fool. He was a brilliant diplomat. And when he found out about the deception, he was furious. He publicly ripped up the treaty, and in a fantastic power move, he paid back the loan Italy had given him with interest. So now Italy's been called out on the world stage. Their big colonial dream is threatened, and they figure, all right, if we can't get it by trickery, we'll take it by force. So, with a modern European army on its way, Menelik had a huge challenge. And it wasn't just about the soldiers. It was political. Ethiopia was made up of all these different regions, with rulers who were fiercely independent and didn't always get along. He had to convince all of them to unite against this one single threat. And he did it by basically saying, look around, folks. Look at what's happening to the rest of Africa. If we don't stand together, we're next. They'll carve us up just like everybody else. And you know what? It worked. In this incredible moment of national unity, soldiers from practically every region, every ethnic group answered the call. They put their old rivalries aside to fight for their country. So what about the Italians? Well, they sent in the big guns, about 20,000 soldiers, led by a general named Oreste Baratieri. And you gotta understand, this was the biggest, most modern European army that had ever been sent to Africa. They were walking in there thinking this was gonna be a cakewalk. An easy win. But here's what they were up against. Menelik's call for unity, it brought out around 100,000 soldiers. 100,000! This was a massive, unified army, fighting on their own land. Not for some far-off colonial dream, but for their very survival. Okay, so the stage is set. The two armies are about to clash near a town called Adwa. And the battlefield itself, well, it's this incredibly rugged, mountainous area in northern Ethiopia. This is where it all goes down. The fate of an entire nation is on the line. Now, Menelik's strategy was just genius. It was all about patience. He didn't just rush in. Instead, he played the long game. He pulled the Italians deeper and deeper into his territory, into these mountains that he knew like the back of his hand. He understood that in a place like this, knowing the land was a way bigger advantage than having fancy new guns. So at dawn on March 1st, the Italians make their move. They advance in 4 big columns, hoping to launch a surprise attack. But there's a problem, a huge one. Their maps are totally wrong. The columns get lost, they get separated in all these confusing valleys, and that's when Menelik pounces. His forces, and get this includes warriors led by the Empress Taitu Batul herself, they just descend on these isolated Italian units and pick them off one by one. It was absolutely brutal. I mean, by the afternoon, the Italian army wasn't just defeated, it was destroyed, annihilated. We're talking something like 70% casualties, thousands killed or captured. To put that in perspective, more Italians died in this one single day than in all the wars it took to unify their own country. And the Ethiopians, they captured everything, all 56 of the Italian cannons, everything. You can imagine what happened next. The news of this disaster, it sent a shockwave across the entire globe. Back in Italy, people were rioting in the streets, the government collapsed. But in Africa, and for people of African descent everywhere, the reaction was just pure joy, complete and utter celebration. So a humbled Italy had to go back to the negotiating table, tail between its legs. This time they signed the Treaty of Addis Ababa. And this treaty was crystal clear. It recognized the complete, total, absolute independence of Ethiopia. The diplomatic victory was just as massive as the military one. But the long-term impact was even bigger. Adwa became this incredible symbol of resistance. It lit a fire under anti-colonial movements for generations. It was the proof, the undeniable proof, that European powers were not invincible. They could be beaten. And that's really the unique thing about Adwa, right? At a time when basically the entire rest of the continent was being divided up by colonizers, Ethiopia stood firm. Through unity, through brilliant strategy, they kept their freedom. It became this shining beacon of independence for Black people all over the world. So when you boil it all down, the story of Adwa is really about what can happen when people from all different backgrounds come together to face a common threat. It's this powerful reminder that history isn't just something that happens to you. You can shape it. And it leaves us with a really big question, right? What can we learn from that kind of unity when we think about the divisions and challenges we're all facing today?